Any apologies for absence, Andrea?
Thank you, Chair. All the members of the committee are present. Thank you.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest, anybody? No, Andrea, thank you. Can we just go back to the public minutes of the previous meeting? We've got 2 to ratify because the ones on the 2nd of September have been amended because Councillor Beach wasn't actually in attendance. We had put her down there, so that's been amended. And also the 25th of November 2024. I propose that the approval of the public minutes from the previous meeting. Do I have a seconder? And part 4 is to consider any urgent business brought forward to the meeting under Rule 12.
And the seconder is
Councillor Locke, yes.
Did we go to the vote?
Yes. Did we go to the vote? No, did we go? No.
What? Yes. I was away from the September meeting, so I was saying for that one. Okay, thank you.
Can we consider any urgent business brought forward to the meeting under Rule 12? Anything? Thank you. No urgent business. We'll now go to part 5 of the meeting, the Monitoring Officer's Update Report.
Thank you. Councillors, the purpose of this report is to provide an annual review of the discharge of my duties as the Monitoring Officer. So the report will ultimately go to full council later this month, but it is agreed practice that it goes before Standards Committee before I take it to full council. So you will have to forgive me, councillors. I've got a bit of information that I need to run by you and that I have to narrate, but hopefully you'll find it useful. In terms of background, you'll be aware, councillors, that the Monitoring Officer is a statutory appointment under Section 5 of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989. As the Head of Legal and Regulatory Services, I perform this role, and these duties are discharged in accordance with legislative requirements, government guidance and the Council's Constitution. You'll also see in the report, councillors, that we refer to Deputy Monitoring Officers under Section 5 of the Act, and well, we have 2 of them. We have Mr Glenn McCusker and Mr Penelope James, both solicitors who perform the DMO roles and have been of great assistance, so long may that continue. In terms of processes, we have arrangements in place for our code of conduct and our complaints process to respond to any breaches of standards, and those arrangements are working satisfactorily at the moment, my own personal views on the available sanctions aside. Now, in terms of standards matters, both myself and the Council's independent persons, when required, continue to give informal advice, and also the Council's Deputy Monitoring Officers also assist in that regard. And they undertake relevant inquiries into allegations of misconduct, and this extends to both our borough councillors but also parish councillors within our district. Interestingly, since the last annual report in March 2024, there have been 4 standards complaints received. The same figure as last year, but if we go back a year to March 2023, then we're probably multiplying that figure by about 4 or 5. So things very much continue to improve in terms of the number of standards complaints that we've been getting. So we remain at relatively low figures, and there are other matters which come in alongside the complaints, but we don't regard them as formal complaints unless those grounds are made within the code of conduct. And sometimes it's just basically a conversation with a resident, just being there as somebody to talk to if they've got a potential standards complaint, and not every time does it actually form an actual complaint itself. So yes, no standards hearings have taken place in the last year, councillors, and the other 2 complaints that were in terms of the 4 complaints, 2 of the 4 complaints were parish council standards complaints. One of the complaints was resolved informally, and the other is currently being considered by an external investigator. Now, the other 2 were submitted against 2 councillors of ESBC, East Staffordshire Borough Council. One of these matters, since the sending out of the report that you have in front of you has now concluded literally last Friday. I have sent out decision notice to all the parties, so that's another complaint finalised. And the final complaint of those two borough council complaints, that was considered to be that no further action was required by one of the council's deputy monitoring officers. So, a concluding remark, councillors, are that the two investigations which have taken place have probably taken a little bit longer than any of us would have liked, and there have been different reasons for this along the way. But actually concluding an investigation is usually the most time-consuming part of the process. Getting those involved to sign off those final statements that they make, and to get that report finalised. But at the same time, I take a fair bit of positivity from the continuing low numbers of complaints that we've received. Now, in terms of the Code of Conduct, the Localism Act 2011 requires the Council and parish and town councils for which it is responsible to adopt a Code of Conduct. All our parishes have done that, and everything seems to be working quite well. In terms of parish and town councillors, we are currently awaiting declarations from members of Staffordshire and Yoxall. As the monitoring officer, I've formally written to them now to chase up those outstanding ROIs, so hopefully I'll get a response in the near future. In terms of the Constitution, arrangements have continued to review and monitor the document. A full review of the Constitution took place in full council in December 2024, and subsequent amendments have since taken place in February as well, following on from the Procurement Act 2023. So I'd say the bottom line is that the document is being maintained, and any further changes that need to take place will always go before full council. One final mention, councillors, is the RIPA Act, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, also known as RIPA. That's when our officers go out there and do covert monitoring and intelligence, but because it's such a sensitive power, it is one of those that we have to monitor as a local authority, and I have to bring before councillors, and I will be bringing before full council. But in terms of our use of RIPA, covert intelligence, it remains a zero. We haven't been using it because we were always encouraged to investigate offences in other ways before we resort to it. RIPA training was arranged for relevant officers in January 2025, and the policy was updated in February 2025. And even though we're not using it, obviously it's prudent to continue training, to continue updating your policies, and yeah, so that concludes my report. The report is for noting, but if anyone's got any comments or remarks, I'll happily take that forward into the full council report on the 17th of March. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Locke.
I have a question. I'm not expecting an immediate answer. I was just wondering whether it's something that had been investigated. You've said that the number of complaints has gone down, and that's great. This is a quiet year, but we've still ended up using external investigators on some of those complaints. Is that because those external investigators offered skills we didn't have within our team, or are we over what the team can cope with capacity-wise? And if it is capacity, have we looked at whether it'd be cheaper to get another part-time person to support the team rather than using external people all the time, which they don't seem that responsive, really? Thank you.
I mean, I can come back to you, for you, Chair. I can come back to you with a bit more detail on that, Councillor Locke, but it depends on local authorities. Some local authorities will do the investigations internally, and once upon a time I did do the investigations as well. But I think it's important to have that separation between your role as the monitoring officer or the deputy monitoring officer and the person investigating an actual breach of standards. I think it's quite easy for both the roles to become contaminated. Of course, you've got to have that continuing and ongoing relationship with the councillor afterwards, but you can be the very person who's investigated them and also found them to be in breach. So I think it's a different approach depending on which council you're working at. But a lot of it, in honesty, does also come down to capacity. There's no way I could do a standards investigation now. The time that's required alongside my other responsibilities, I As the same with the DMOs as well, the deputy monitoring officers. But I will I can give you a bit more information over email, if that's okay, Councillor Locke.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? No? Everybody happy with that? Thank you. We now have 2 items to consider in the private part of the meeting. So I'll now move that in accordance with section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting, as it's likely in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings that there would be disclosed exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, indicated in brackets before each item number on the agenda. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mansfield. Sorry. Yeah. Can we now go to the vote? For all those in favour? Any abstentions? No.